I remember when I first met Melissa. She was 21, and I was 23. We worked together in a local grocery store. She was a cashier, and I was in produce. I was finishing up a degree in computer science at the local university, and she was majoring in communications. I remember the day I truly noticed her, how she stood by the tomatoes, scanning them one by one for bruises before placing them on the display. Her hair was in a simple ponytail, and she was wearing the standard blue work apron that we all had to wear. Yet, something about her just lit up the room. People talk about love at first sight, but I don't think I ever believed in it. What I felt for Melissa was an immediate sense of curiosity and comfort. She had this wit about her. She could make a joke out of anything, yet she seemed fragile. She was always chewing on her bottom lip when she was lost in thought. After a few days of small talk over damaged fruit, I mustered enough courage to ask her out. We ended up going to a coffee shop near campus. She ordered a latte, I took black coffee, and we talked until the place closed. To be honest, it felt more like a job interview than a date. Melissa was always enthusiastic about me, about my goals, about my silly jokes. She asked question after question. What made you pick computer science? Do you have siblings? What's your biggest fear? I answered them all. The next date was the same, intense and thrilling. We talked for hours on end. I started to notice the freckles on her nose, the way her eyes squinted when she laughed, or how she always tried to pay for my drink no matter how many times I insisted. Those things drew me in, and soon we were calling each other boyfriend and girlfriend. It all felt so natural and easy. After graduation, I got a job at a local tech startup. Meanwhile, Melissa decided to change her major from communications to English, which meant she tacked on an extra year of study. I didn't mind, I actually admired her. She was never someone who'd be pigeonholed. She always followed her gut. She had dreams of becoming a writer or a news anchor, or maybe even a teacher someday. The problem was, she never could pinpoint her one true passion. But in terms of relationships, we both seemed sure. We wanted each other, no question. She moved into my tiny studio apartment when she was in her last year of school. I remember feeling so lucky that someone wanted to share a space with me, a place so cramped that you could make coffee and go to the bathroom at the same time if you stood at just the right angle. Yet every day with her was a small adventure. If you'd asked me then, I'd have told you I was living the dream. I proposed on our 3rd anniversary. Nothing fancy. A small ring I bought after saving for months. I couldn't afford the extravagant diamond I knew she deserved, but I made up for it by cooking her favorite meal, spaghetti carbonara, and writing a letter telling her that no matter what she decided to do with her life, I'd be there cheering her on. She said yes, with tears in her eyes. She kissed me so hard I almost fell over. That moment was the happiest day of my life, until our wedding day a year later. That day was a blur of white lace, laughter, friends and family, and an over-catered buffet that left us with leftovers for a week. We danced until midnight and crashed into our hotel bed too exhausted to do anything but fall asleep in each other's arms. That was our beginning. It felt like a fairy tale. I often reflect on how the seeds of heartbreak are sometimes planted in the best of times. But back then, I couldn't see any cracks forming. We were too busy being happy, caught up in the magic of new love and shared ambition. Marriage isn't all about romance. It's a routine of coffee mugs and errands, socks on the floor, and shared budgeting spreadsheets. Within our first year, we found a slightly bigger apartment, one that had a separate bedroom from the living space, at least. By that point, I'd been promoted at my job, and Melissa had decided to work part-time at a local marketing firm while trying to finish her English degree. We had enough money to cover our bills, with a bit of fun money left over. Every morning, I'd wake up around 6:30 a.m., sneak out of the bedroom to let Melissa sleep in, and brew coffee. The smell would fill the apartment, warm, rich, comforting. At 7:30, I'd gently knock on the bedroom door, come back inside, and set her mug on the nightstand. She'd stretch, roll over, and we'd share a sleepy smile. That was our small ritual, one I found so much joy in. She said it was like having a personal barista, and that someday she'd have to repay me by letting me sleep in. She never quite managed to do that, but I never minded. Melissa had a sweet but stubborn streak. She'd never accept help when she was in over her head, and that was something I admired mostly, her independence. But it also meant that she could be secretive. If something bothered her, it took a lot of coaxing to get her to talk. Early in our marriage, I saw that as a challenge. I prided myself on being her confidant, the person who finally cracked her open when she was stressed. In hindsight, I wonder if that was a sign of deeper communication issues we never addressed. By our third year of marriage, I'd settled into my job enough that I worked mostly from home. Melissa had landed a stable content writing position at a local magazine. Plus, she was freelancing on the side. Our lives seemed to revolve around the glow of laptop screens. I'd see her in the living room, legs folded beneath her on the couch, typing away at an article about the best local coffee shops or an interview with a minor celebrity. I'd ask if she wanted tea or a snack, and she'd wave me away, so focused that she barely noticed me. I would laugh. I was proud of her drive, proud of how her words came so easily. When we were both free, we'd watch Netflix together, usually some comedy show or a rom-com. We'd order pizza or Thai food. We had movie nights in, date nights out, brunch with friends. If I had to describe it simply, I'd say it was comfortable. Some might call it routine. We were no longer in the honeymoon phase, but we liked the life we were building, or so I thought. Our fights were small, petty. Who forgot to take out the trash? Who used up the last of the hot sauce? Whose turn was it to pay the Wi-Fi bill? We made up quickly, often with an apology and a quick kiss. Looking back, none of that prepared me for what was coming. I guess I should mention that Melissa struggled with self-esteem. She constantly compared herself to her peers, especially the ones who seemed to have made it big, published authors, journalists on national TV, or even just acquaintances from college who had found their dream jobs. She'd scold herself for not being more successful. I'd remind her that success wasn't a race, but she'd shrug it off. Sometimes she'd accuse me of being condescending or overly protective. At the time, I dismissed it as her frustration. I wish I had realized how crucial open conversations are. Life doesn't break all at once. It cracks and buckles over time. Even so, I didn't see those cracks, or I refused to look. I was lost in my own contentment. I believed that as long as I was a good husband, supportive, caring, steady, things would turn out fine. I believed that we'd eventually grow old together, watch our kids run around in a backyard, and retire somewhere near a beach. It's odd how sure I was, how unwavering that vision felt, right until the moment everything collapsed. The first inkling that something was off came from small, almost insignificant moments. One evening, Melissa came home later than usual from work. She said she'd been finishing up an article at the office. She looked flustered, but tried to brush it off as being tired. I wanted to rub her shoulders, maybe run her a bath. She snapped, "I just need to be left alone for a bit." That was unusual. She'd never been so abrupt. I let it go, thinking maybe she just had a bad day. A few weeks later, she started dressing up more than usual, especially on days she claimed she had meetings or networking events. She'd put on makeup with more care, style her hair meticulously, and pick out clothes that flattered her figure. I complimented her, telling her how gorgeous she looked. She gave me a half-hearted smile, never quite meeting my eyes. I'd press for details about who she was meeting or what the event was about. She'd respond vaguely, and then change the subject. I told myself not to be jealous or suspicious. After all, hadn't I always trusted her? Another change was her phone usage. Melissa had never been overly protective of her phone. We had the kind of relationship where if I needed to borrow her phone to look up a recipe, I'd just pick it up. But now, she kept it face down. If I even glanced her way while her phone buzzed, she'd snatch it up quickly or tilt the screen away. She changed her passcode, which she explained by saying she was worried about data breaches. She started getting more notifications late at night. When I'd ask, "Who's messaging you?" she'd reply, "Just work stuff," but never elaborate. One night, she was taking a shower, and I was on the bed scrolling through my laptop. Her phone lit up with a notification. It was from someone named Ethan Work. The message preview said, "Had a great time earlier. Let's do it again soon." My stomach twisted. My first reaction was that maybe it was about an interview or a project. Why would my mind jump to anything else? But the words "had a great time earlier" carried a personal vibe that gave me an uneasy feeling. When she got out of the shower, I casually asked who Ethan was. Melissa dried her hair for what felt like forever, then said, "Oh, just a colleague who's helping me with some magazine pitches." I tried to read her eyes. They darted to the side before meeting mine. She was lying, or at least leaving out key details. But I pushed down my suspicion. I wanted to trust her, to not be the paranoid husband. I told myself that I was misinterpreting everything, that this was normal workplace camaraderie. Looking back, I think we both knew on some level that our relationship was in trouble. But neither of us wanted to say it out loud. On nights when her phone buzzed incessantly, I tried to block it out by focusing on Netflix or getting lost in a coding project. Meanwhile, she started avoiding real conversations about anything personal. The walls were going up, and we pretended everything was fine. I recall one dinner we had with friends. My best friend, Darren, and his wife, Jen, came over for a barbecue. Melissa was quiet the entire evening, hardly touching her food, scrolling through her phone whenever she got the chance. Jen later pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I shrugged it off. Melissa told me earlier she had some deadlines that day, so maybe that was on her mind. But Jen gave me this sad, knowing look. Something was definitely off, and I was the last one to accept it. Humans can be willfully blind. We'd rather not see the truth until it slaps us in the face. My trust in Melissa was so absolute that I considered any suspicion to be a betrayal of that trust. So I swallowed it all, every late-night message, every shift in her behavior, and told myself that once her workload lightened up, everything would go back to normal. I was wrong. Eventually, the universe decided I needed a wake-up call. It came one Friday afternoon when I arrived home earlier than expected. I'd left the office around noon, intending to surprise Melissa by taking her out for lunch. She'd said she was working from home that day, something she did occasionally when she had articles to finish. As I stepped into the apartment building's lobby, I typed out a quick text. "Hey babe, want sushi for lunch?" "I'm almost home." I hit send and hopped into the elevator. There was no immediate reply, which was odd because she usually responded quickly, even if it was just a thumbs-up emoji. The apartment door was unlocked, which was also strange. Melissa was pretty paranoid about security. She always locked up even when she was inside. I walked in quietly, not because I suspected anything, but because I wanted to surprise her. I imagined I'd find her in the living room, hunched over her laptop, wearing her usual sweatpants and baggy t-shirt, hair in a messy bun. But the living room was empty, though her laptop was on the coffee table, open but in sleep mode. I heard voices coming from the bedroom. My heart stuttered. Was she on a call? Then I recognized that the voices weren't exactly talking. They were muffled, a mix of hushed tones and suppressed laughter. I don't know what compelled me to proceed as quietly as I did. Maybe some primal instinct. I approached the half-closed bedroom door and peered through the crack. Inside I saw them. Melissa and a man I recognized from a single photo she'd shown me once on her phone. She called him Ethan. They were together on our bed. Tangled sheets, hurried whispers, the flush of skin. My mind froze, and for a split second, I questioned if I was hallucinating. But the cold reality set in quickly. My wife was having an intimate moment with someone else, right in the bed where we'd shared countless nights, whispered secrets, made love, planned our future. Something in my chest tore open. I must have made a sound, maybe a gasp or a sharp intake of breath, because Melissa suddenly looked up. Our eyes locked. She scrambled to cover herself, while Ethan jumped to his feet. I just stood there, numb, no coherent words forming on my tongue. There's no way to prepare yourself for that moment. No matter how many suspicions or doubts you have, the actual sight of your spouse with another person is devastating. For a second, none of us moved. Ethan was the first to do anything. He bent down, grabbing his clothes, muttering something that might have been an apology. I remember Melissa calling my name in a panicked voice. "Daniel, wait, this isn't what it looks like," as if there could be any other explanation. My mind raced. Isn't what it looks like? You're literally in bed together. I turned on my heel and stormed out. I heard Melissa scramble after me, still calling my name. I made it to the hallway before she caught up, clad in a hastily thrown-on bathrobe. She grabbed my arm, tears in her eyes, stammering apologies, pleased that we could talk about this. I shook her off. I didn't say a word, because I feared that if I opened my mouth, I'd either scream or break down. I took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, each step echoing with the thundering of my heartbeat. Out on the street, everything felt surreal. The city was the same, cars honking, people hurrying to lunch, the sun shining overhead. Yet, my entire world had just imploded. I walked a few blocks without any plan, my thoughts spiraling. Should I go back? Should I confront her? Should I find Ethan and break his nose? Should I call a friend? Eventually, I found myself in a small park. I collapsed onto a bench. My phone buzzed incessantly. Melissa was texting me, calling me, leaving voicemails. I read the messages. "I'm so sorry. Please come back. We need to talk. Let me explain." Explain what? The entire situation was self-explanatory. For hours, I sat there, watching people live their normal lives while my mind replayed that image in an endless loop. A part of me wanted to disappear. Another part of me wanted to run back home and demand that she make sense of this. But a bigger part of me was just numb. Eventually, Darren, my best friend, called. Melissa must have reached out to him. He asked where I was, said he was on his way. I didn't protest. Darren found me on that bench. He didn't ask for details. He could see from my face that I was devastated. He put a hand on my shoulder, guided me to his car, and drove me to his place. I spent that night on his couch, alternating between silence and sobbing fits. If it weren't for him, I might have spent the night wandering the streets like a broken shell. He and Jen didn't pry. They just let me be. And for that, I'll always be grateful. In the span of a single afternoon, my life had changed forever. I discovered the unthinkable, that the woman I dedicated my heart to, the one I believed in without question, had betrayed me. The pain was indescribable. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a sense of my identity being shattered. Who was I without our marriage? Had it all been a lie? Over the next couple of days, Melissa texted and called nonstop. I didn't respond at first. Darren and Jen advised me to give myself time to process, and I agreed. I needed to regain some sense of composure before talking to her. I took a leave of absence from work, telling my boss I had a personal emergency. He was understanding, thankfully. Finally, on the third day, I mustered the courage to face her. I told her to meet me at a coffee shop near Darren's place. I didn't want to go back to our apartment yet, and I sure as hell didn't want to meet anywhere too private. If things got intense, I needed a public setting where I wouldn't lose control. She arrived, looking disheveled, puffy eyes, messy hair, wearing clothes that seemed hastily thrown on. She spotted me at a corner table and approached tentatively. I didn't stand up. I couldn't. My legs felt heavy, and my heart pounded with a mix of anger, hurt, and a strange kind of pity. She sat across from me, hands trembling around a cup of herbal tea she must have ordered. There was a long silence before she spoke. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words hung there, inadequate. She tried to explain. It started as a work friendship. Ethan was a project manager at the magazine. They began working closely, bonding over shared creative interests. One late night turned into dinner. She was feeling overwhelmed, stressed, insecure. He listened. They laughed. One thing led to another. I asked if it was just physical or if there were feelings involved. She hesitated, and that told me everything I needed to know. She admitted that emotions had grown, but she'd been confused. She felt lost in her career, inadequate, and Ethan's attention made her feel valued and alive. I almost laughed at the absurdity. She was trying to justify her betrayal by painting me as so stable that she never questioned my devotion. But apparently, she needed the thrill of someone else's validation. I asked her how many times it happened. She confessed it had been going on for a few months, not just once or twice. They'd meet at motels in his car, or sometimes in our apartment when she knew I'd be away. My stomach turned. She started crying, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, seething. The more she revealed, the more I felt like a fool. Memories flooded back. Those late-night texts, the sudden care with her appearance, the evasive answers. It all made sickening sense now. Through her tears, she begged for forgiveness, swearing she ended things with Ethan the moment I caught them, that she realized she wanted to save our marriage. But her words felt hollow. If I hadn't come home early, would it have continued indefinitely? The conversation ended with me telling her I needed space. She asked if I'd come home, said she'd stay at a friend's if I wanted the apartment to myself, anything to repair the damage. I told her I didn't have an answer yet. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her there with a cup of tea gone cold. I felt no satisfaction, only a deep, raw ache that gnawed at my insides. After that meeting, I stayed with Darren and Jen for another week. Jen convinced me to see a therapist, someone to help me sort through the emotional chaos. Initially, I balked. Therapy felt like admitting I couldn't handle my own life. But after all that happened, it was clear I needed someone professional to guide me. The first few therapy sessions were brutal. I cried in front of a stranger, something I never thought I'd do. I admitted how betrayed and emasculated I felt, how I was oscillating between fury at Melissa and desperation to turn back the clock. The therapist validated my feelings, explaining that this was a form of trauma. Infidelity often blindsides partners, leaving them questioning their self-worth and their reality. Meanwhile, Melissa kept trying to contact me. She sent me long emails pouring out her apologies, her regrets, her love. She claimed she was willing to do anything: couples therapy, a break from work, moving to another state, a fresh start. Part of me wanted to grab onto her promises, but another part of me was livid. How dare she do this to us, then expect me to patch things up because she suddenly had a change of heart? I started swinging back and forth between these extremes. One day, I'd reread her messages and consider giving our marriage another chance. The next day, I'd fantasize about never speaking to her again, about divorcing her and moving on with my life. Anger became my companion. I resented her for destroying our marriage, for making me doubt myself. I resented her for forcing me into this mess of emotions that I never asked for. In the midst of all this, I had to figure out practical matters: finances, rent, the lease. Our families got wind of the situation. My mother was furious, Melissa's mother tearful. It was chaos. I just wanted to crawl into a hole. But there was no running away from reality. I had to confront it head-on. After several therapy sessions and many sleepless nights, I agreed to talk with Melissa again, this time in a more structured environment, my therapist's office. Melissa came in first. I entered a few minutes later. We sat on opposite sides of the room, each of us gripping a box of tissues like it was a life preserver. The therapist guided the conversation, ensuring we remained respectful. Melissa apologized again, describing how she felt trapped in her own insecurities, how she convinced herself that what she was doing didn't negate her love for me. The therapist stopped her there, emphasizing that her actions were a profound betrayal, regardless of her emotional reasoning. Then it was my turn to speak. I let out everything. The pain of seeing them together, the humiliation, the shattered trust, the sense that our entire life had been a lie for months. Melissa sobbed, but I didn't soften. I needed her to understand the gravity of what she'd done. We discussed whether we both wanted to try saving the marriage, or if we should separate. Melissa insisted she wanted to fight for us. I admitted that part of me wanted to salvage our relationship, but I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. The therapist suggested an in-depth counseling program for couples dealing with infidelity. It would be grueling, a commitment of time, money, and emotional energy. I walked out of that session with a weight on my chest. The decision to attempt reconciliation or head for divorce was terrifying. Either path felt like a gamble. If we tried to repair things, who was to say I wouldn't end up in more pain down the line? But if I left, could I live with the knowledge that maybe, just maybe, we could have rebuilt something worthwhile? Back at Darren's place, I brooded over the possibility of giving Melissa another chance. Darren thought I should walk away. Jen was more open-minded, pointing out that some marriages do recover from infidelity. They left the choice to me, reminding me that there was no right or wrong answer, just what I could live with. A pivotal moment came when I realized how deeply I still cared for Melissa, despite everything. Memories of our early days kept floating to the surface. The nights we'd stay up talking about our dreams. The mornings she'd surprise me with pancakes. Then, the memory of her in bed with Ethan would slap me back to reality. I was torn in half. Eventually, I decided that I couldn't make a snap judgment. If there was any hope of healing, I needed to see it through systematically. I proposed a trial separation of 3 months. During that time, Melissa would move in with her mom, and we'd both attend individual therapy and couples counseling. We'd limit contact to counseling sessions and essential logistics. Afterward, we'd reassess. Melissa agreed. She left our apartment, tearfully packing up her belongings. I returned, and the silence in those rooms was crushing. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of her favorite mug, the throw blanket she always insisted on buying, her half-empty bottle of perfume on the bathroom shelf. I sometimes found myself crying at random moments, overwhelmed by a wave of grief for the life we once shared. Those 3 months were some of the hardest of my life. Each day, I woke up alone in the apartment that once felt so full of love. I had nightmares, vivid dreams of her and Ethan. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. Therapy helped, but it also forced me to face questions I'd been avoiding. Did I miss warning signs? Was I too complacent? Should I have asked more about her struggles? I'd oscillate between blaming myself and blaming her completely. My therapist reminded me that while no one is a perfect spouse, the choice to cheat belonged to Melissa alone. Still, it was impossible not to dissect our entire relationship, searching for the moment things went wrong. During our couples counseling sessions, Melissa expressed remorse and reiterated her desire to rebuild. She ended all contact with Ethan. She showed me proof of her resignation from the magazine and an exchange of emails severing professional ties with him. She even offered access to her phone and social media, saying she'd do anything to restore my trust. But trust can't be forced. It has to grow back if it ever does. Some days, I wanted to hold her and tell her we'd figure this out. Other days, I wanted to scream at her for the pain she caused. My emotional whiplash was constant. The counselor encouraged us to be patient, to listen to each other without judgment, and to share our feelings honestly. Melissa revealed that she'd always struggled with feeling like she was underachieving compared to me. She said she felt like a failure, and that Ethan's attention made her feel special in a way she thought she'd lost. She insisted her actions didn't come from a place of malice, but rather from her own insecurities. That explanation provided some context, but it didn't diminish the betrayal. If anything, it highlighted that her self-esteem issues ran deeper than I realized. She kept apologizing for not communicating, for letting her emotional turmoil spiral into an affair. I listened, still uncertain if her regret was enough for me to move past the image I had burned into my mind. The two of them on our bed. Throughout the separation, I focused on self-care. I started going for morning runs, something I hadn't done in years. I reconnected with old friends. I even picked up a new hobby, photography, to channel my restless energy. There were small moments of clarity where I felt proud of myself for surviving this storm. As the trial separation neared its end, I had to make a choice. Melissa's presence in counseling was earnest. She was consistent in her apologies and her willingness to change. She respected my boundaries and never pressured me for intimacy or quick forgiveness. Yet, the question remained, could I truly forgive her, or would resentment poison us forever? The last couple's therapy session before our separation ended was a pivotal one. We'd spent so many sessions dissecting the affair, our individual issues, and possible paths forward. The counselor asked us to visualize our future, together or apart, and discuss what we saw. Melissa went first. She described wanting to move into a new apartment, a neutral space free from the memories of her betrayal. She saw us traveling together, rediscovering our bond. She wanted to renew our vows one day, have kids, build a life we'd once dreamed of. She admitted she knew it wouldn't be easy, and she was prepared for the long, painstaking process of rebuilding trust. When it was my turn, my throat felt tight. I stared at the floor for a good minute before speaking. I finally confessed that I loved her, that I always would, but I also acknowledged how scared I was. I wasn't sure if, in the back of my mind, I'd forever see a flashing sign that said she cheated. She lied. Could I push past that? Or would every disagreement become a reason to dredge up the past? The counselor suggested we take a chance, commit to a defined period of marital counseling, beyond what we'd already done, and see if we could move forward. If it felt too painful or too impossible, we'd agree to part amicably. Melissa squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. I hesitated, but in that moment I chose to try. I wasn't ready to throw away our history, not without giving it every possible effort to salvage what we'd built. That evening, we left the therapist's office hand in hand, the first time we'd done so in months. It felt weird, like holding hands with a stranger. She came back to the apartment with me, just to gather some essentials. We talked briefly about finding a new place, something that wouldn't remind me of Ethan at every corner. She'd stay with her mom for now, but she'd come over for counseling homework sessions, for dinners, to slowly reintroduce herself into my life. Part of me felt relief. I had made a decision, at least. Another part of me was terrified. What if I was making a huge mistake? What if I was prolonging the inevitable? But I couldn't ignore the persistent love I had for her, the memories of who she was before all this. And I wanted to see if that person was still there, beneath the guilt and regret. Over the next 6 months, we embarked on the most challenging journey of our lives. We continued weekly couples counseling. Melissa continued her individual therapy, tackling her self-esteem issues. I stuck with my own therapy, learning how to cope with triggers, moments or thoughts that brought the affair to mind like a punch to the gut. One major step was leaving our old apartment. We found a small but cozy townhouse in a different neighborhood. The act of moving felt symbolic, like a purge of old ghosts. We packed our belongings methodically, discarding things that reminded me too much of her betrayal, like the bed sheets I'd seen her with Ethan on. We bought new furniture together, choosing colors and fabrics we both liked. It was nerve-wracking and hopeful at the same time. In our counseling sessions, we practiced open communication. If something bothered me, even something small, I was encouraged to speak up rather than let it fester. If Melissa felt insecure or anxious, she learned to express it, instead of seeking external validation. It was awkward, sometimes painful, but we persisted. We had honest conversations about intimacy, too. I told her it would take time before I could be physically affectionate without flashing back to her affair. She respected that. showing me patience I wished she'd shown herself before the cheating ever happened. Little by little, we started dating again, going to the movies, trying a new restaurant, taking evening walks. We even tried a weekend getaway to a cabin an hour outside the city. It was supposed to be romantic, but I spent the first night staring at the ceiling, wrestling with memories. Melissa held my hand throughout, apologizing yet again for the pain she'd caused. A part of me hated that I needed so many apologies to feel somewhat secure, but it was our reality. Not everything was smooth. We fought hard. One night, I accused her of not understanding how broken I still felt. She fired back, claiming she was doing everything to make amends, and maybe I'd never be satisfied. We almost walked out on each other then. But the next morning we sat down and talked it out, tears and all. This was the new normal, raw honesty, immediate confrontation of issues, no more letting problems simmer. Our therapists reminded us that the process of healing from infidelity can take years. Some couples never recover. Others find a way to rebuild. We were in the thick of that uncertain process. I found myself leaning on Darren less and less, trying to stand on my own. He and Jen were relieved I was making progress, but they also worried I was setting myself up for more heartbreak. I couldn't blame them for being protective. Sometimes I wondered if they were right. And then there were moments of genuine connection. Melissa surprising me with my favorite meal, or me discovering that I could look her in the eyes and not feel a stab of betrayal. Those moments were fleeting at first, but they grew. Slowly, we established a new routine. It wasn't the naive bliss of our early marriage, but a more guarded closeness. So here I am, Reddit, laying out the raw truth of my life these past 2 years. Yes, it's been that long since the day I found Melissa with Ethan. And somehow I'm still here, and she's still by my side, forging a new path. Are we perfect? Far from it. There are days when I feel a pang of doubt, when a random thought or a movie scene triggers a memory I wish I could erase. But there are also days when I see the genuine remorse in Melissa's eyes and recognize how far we've come. I won't say that staying is the right decision for everyone. Some betrayals are deal breakers, and rightly so. But in our case, for now, I choose to believe we can write a new chapter. It's fragile, it's complicated, and it's real. I've learned more about myself, about honesty, boundaries, and mental health than I ever knew before. To anyone reading this, wondering how one survives such betrayal, it's a slow, jagged road. You might choose to leave. You might choose to stay. Neither path is easy. Infidelity is a wound that takes a long time to heal, if it ever fully does. But life goes on, and there can be hope, an honest, battle-worn hope. That's my story. If you made it this far, thank you. I needed to get it all out, to have a record of what happened and where I stand now. Maybe it'll help someone else, or maybe it just helps me to have it written down. Either way, thanks for reading. Thank you for reading, and take care of yourselves.